Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery.
Okay, ready to dive into something kind of different.
Uh-oh, what do you have for me this time?
Today, it's wise crowds. It's one of those liberating structures things, you know?
Yeah, I've heard of those. Those liberating structures are cool. They help make meetings less boring, right?
Right, and more productive, too. And wise crowds, well, the idea is a group can actually be, like, smarter than just one expert. What do you think about that?
You know, it's funny because it's not really about the group being against the expert. It's more like they work together, you know?
Interesting. So how does that actually work? How do you use this wise crowds thing?
Okay, so imagine, like, you have a problem.
Yeah.
Could be anything, right? A tough decision at work, or
Yeah.
maybe you're just stuck on something in your personal life.
Yeah. Okay, so what then?
Well, with wise crowds, you're the client.
Right.
And you get a group of people, they're the consultants, they help you figure things out.
So it's like instead of stressing alone, you've got a whole team of advisors.
Exactly. And it happens pretty fast, too. In a small group, maybe 4 or 5 people, each person only gets 15 minutes as the client. Keeps things moving.
15 minutes. Wow, that's quick. So how does that even work?
It's all about structure. So first, the client, they explain their problem. And then,
Everyone just jumps in with solutions.
not quite. First, the consultants, they ask questions, trying to really understand, where the client's coming from.
So you really dive deep into the problem first.
Exactly. And then, here's the cool part. The client actually turns their back to the group.
Wait, they turn around. Why?
It's kind of brilliant, actually. That way, the consultants, they can brainstorm freely. They don't have to worry about, like, their facial expressions or whatever.
Makes sense. So the client can't see them while they're talking.
Yeah, it helps everyone feel more comfortable, more honest. And then, once they've got some ideas,
They turn back around.
yep, and the consultants share their thoughts. Then the client can, think about what they heard, what made sense.
So it's not just advice giving. The client is still in control.
Totally. And it's not just about getting answers either. It helps you get better at asking for help, and giving it, too.
Yeah, that can be tough. Okay, but what about bigger groups? Not just a few people.
Wise crowds can actually work for big teams, too. Imagine, a whole room of people.
Okay, but wouldn't that be chaotic?
Not necessarily. So you still have one client and their problem, and then you have a small group of 2 to 4 people as the main consultants.
Okay, so they get the most attention.
Right. And everyone else, they're like satellite teams. They watch, listen, and then they can offer their ideas too.
Wow, so multiple levels of brainstorming.
Yeah. But it still stays focused because of the time limits and the way the feedback is given.
Interesting. It sounds like this could really change how teams work.
Right. But like with anything, there are things to watch out for, right?
Yeah, I remember the source mentioned something about tips and traps.
Yeah. So, one trap is thinking that only the big experts have good ideas.
Ah, I see. So even though it's called wise crowds, it's not about who's the wisest person in the room.
Exactly. It's about getting all those different viewpoints.
Yeah.
And also being self-aware, noticing those little group dynamics that can mess things up.
Yeah, like when someone talks too much or everyone jumps to solutions before understanding the problem. Been there.
Totally. And another thing the source talks about is keeping the focus on the client. So the consultants, they're not there to push their own ideas.
Right. It's about the client figuring things out for themselves.
Yeah. The consultants should be asking open-ended questions, guiding the client towards their own aha moment.
Yeah. It's like we were saying before, it's about collaboration, not just telling someone what to do.
Right. And the cool thing is, everyone should get a chance to be the client. Because, let's be honest, everybody's got at least one problem they could use help with, right?
True that. So it creates this sense of, we're all in this together.
Totally. And it reminds us that we all need a little help sometimes.
Thinks you think, right? So this wise crowds thing, it sounds pretty versatile. I'm curious to hear how it plays out in real life. Real examples.
Absolutely. We'll dive into that next time. See you then.
All right, so last time we were talking about wise crowds. And it sounds pretty cool in theory, but I'm really curious about how it actually works in real life.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
It's one thing to talk about the idea, but seeing it in action, that's where it gets interesting.
Totally. So you were mentioning some real-world examples before the break, like those fellowship programs. How does wise crowds actually work in that kind of setting?
So picture this, right?
Yeah.
You have this group of people, all super talented, working on their own projects. But everyone hits those moments where they're like, ooh, I'm stuck. What am I doing?
Oh, yeah, I've been there.
Totally. And usually you might just have like one mentor to turn to.
Yeah.
But with wise crowds, it's like the whole group becomes your support system.
Oh, wow. So everyone can give advice and everyone can get advice.
Exactly. And the cool thing is, because everyone's kind of in the same boat, the feedback is super relevant.
Hmm.
It's not just some general advice. It's coming from people who get what you're going through.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like, oh, they've been there, they get it. So it's more than just getting advice. It's like building this sense of community too.
For sure. It's like we're all learning from each other. We talked about those research groups too, right? The ones spread out all over the place.
Right. I was curious about that. Like, how does wise crowds help when everyone's, miles apart?
So imagine these teams, maybe in different countries even, working on this big research project. Wise crowds lets them connect, even if it's virtual. They can share their progress, get feedback on what they're finding, and maybe even spot new ways to collaborate that they wouldn't have seen otherwise.
So it's like having those regular team meetings, but online. So everyone can be included no matter where they are.
Exactly. And it's not just about staying updated. It's about actively engaging with each other's work. Asking questions, offering fresh perspectives.
Ah, so it's not just like, here's my update, see you later. It's more interactive.
Way more. And that's what helps keep those creative juices flowing, even when you're not in the same room. It keeps everyone connected to the big picture, the goals of the project. But research isn't the only place where wise crowds can make a difference. What about those company mergers we talked about?
Yeah, mergers can be rough. Lots of tension, people worried about their jobs. How does wise crowds even work in that kind of environment?
Right. You've got these two companies, each with their own way of doing things, their own culture. It's like a recipe for clashes.
For sure. So how did wise crowds help?
Well, they brought the managers from both companies together. Think about it. Instead of them arguing or feeling threatened, they actually had this structured way to share their concerns, their perspectives, and brainstorm solutions together.
Ah, so it helps them find common ground instead of just fighting for their own side.
Exactly. And because wise crowds is all about listening to each other and giving feedback respectfully, it actually helps build trust, even between people who might have started off feeling pretty wary of each other.
Wow, that's powerful. So it's not just about solving the immediate problems, it's about changing the whole atmosphere.
Totally. It's about turning this potentially negative experience into a learning experience where everyone feels heard.
Yeah.
And that positive vibe, it can spread throughout the whole company. Pretty cool, right?
Yeah, I'm really seeing how versatile this is. It's not just for one type of team or one type of problem. It's like a tool you can use in so many different ways.
Exactly. The source material mentions other examples too, like foundations using wise crowds to figure out how to make their projects even better, or even salespeople brainstorming new strategies to attract clients.
So it's like whatever your goal is, wise crowds can help you get there as long as you've got a group of people willing to share their wisdom.
Right. It's about tapping into that collective brain power, no matter what you're trying to achieve. But even with all these examples, I think it's important to remember wise crowds is ultimately about the individual, the client.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. We talked about how the consultants are there to help, but not to, like, tell the client what to do.
Exactly. It's about empowering the client to find their own solutions, to have those aha moments. And a big part of that is asking the right questions.
So instead of giving advice, the consultants should be more like guides.
Exactly. They're helping the client clarify their own thinking, figure out what they really want to achieve, and that leads to solutions that actually feel right for them.
That's cool. So it's less about here's the answer and more about what does success look like for you?
Right. It's like holding up a mirror,
Mm.
helping the client see their situation more clearly. And to do that, active listening is key. Really paying attention to what the client is saying and maybe even what they're not saying.
Ah, that's interesting. So it's not just about waiting for your turn to talk. It's about really trying to understand the client's perspective.
Totally. You got to pick up on those little cues, the body language, the hesitations. It's like being a detective trying to uncover the whole story.
And those insights can help the consultants give better feedback, right? It's not just about offering generic advice. It's about tailoring it to that specific person.
For sure. In fact, the source even suggests that the consultants take notes while the client is speaking.
Oh, that's a good tip. Helps you stay focused and really absorb what the client's saying. But even with good listening skills, it can still be hard to be vulnerable, to share your struggles with a group.
Absolutely. Not everyone's comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Especially if you're used to being like the leader or the one with all the answers. So creating a safe space is super important.
Makes sense. So how do you do that?
Well, one simple thing is reminding everyone that we all have challenges. It's about normalizing the experience of asking for help.
Mhm.
Making it clear that it's okay to not have all the answers.
Yeah. Like, we're all human here. We all need help sometimes.
Exactly. And it's also helpful to frame the whole thing as a collaboration. It's not about judging the client. It's about working together to find solutions.
Hmm.
So the language you use matters.
So instead of saying you should have done this or that was a mistake, it's more about asking what led you to that decision or what did you learn from that?
Exactly. It's a subtle shift, but it makes a big difference. It takes the focus away from blame and puts it on understanding and growth.
I like that. It creates a more positive environment, more supportive. It makes me think about how I approach problem solving. I need to remember that it's not just about finding the right answer. It's about creating the right space for those answers to come out.
Yes. And that mindset, it can change everything. How you communicate with people, how you approach challenges, how you support each other. It's like planting seeds of collaboration that can keep growing long after the Wise Crowd session is over.
I love that. But, we've been talking a lot about using wise crowds in work settings, but it makes me wonder, could you use it in your personal life too?
Totally. Think about it. When's the last time you really sat down and talked through a personal challenge with a group of people who genuinely want to help you?
Good point. Usually it's just me overthinking things in my own head.
And that can be a dangerous place. Wise Crowds forces you to, get out of your own head and get some outside perspectives.
It's like having your own personal board of advisors, but for your life, not just your work.
Right. And because Wise Crowds is all about listening and respectful feedback, it can help you become more self-aware too. You start to see yourself through other people's eyes, and that can be really eye-opening.
Oh, that's interesting. It's like holding up a mirror to your own communication style, how you interact with people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you might even discover some things about yourself that you didn't realize before. Things that might be holding you back.
So it's not just about solving problems. It's about using those problems as opportunities to learn and grow.
100%. And you can use Wise Crowds for all sorts of personal challenges. Big decisions, relationship stuff, even if you're just feeling stuck in a rut.
It's like a tool for navigating life, which we all need sometimes. And one thing I really appreciate is that with wise crowds, you're still in control. You choose the challenge, you choose the people you want to help you, and ultimately you decide what advice you want to take.
Yeah. You're harnessing the wisdom of a crowd, but you're still the one driving. That's what makes it so empowering. It's like saying, hey, I need help, but I'm still the boss of my own life.
I love that. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. From the basics of how Wise Crowds works to real-world examples and even how it can be used for personal growth.
We've definitely gone deep, but I think it's time to get even more practical.
Totally. We've talked about the what and the why of Wise Crowds, but now I want to know the how.
Next time, we'll dive into all the nitty-gritty details of actually facilitating a Wise Crowd session.
Sounds good. Can't wait. Okay, so we've explored what Wise Crowds is all about, seen how it's used in different situations. But now I'm thinking, how do we actually do this thing? Like, if I wanted to try Wise Crowds with my team, where do I even start?
Well, it's kind of like, planning a party. You want to set things up so everyone has a good time, right? And as the facilitator, you're like the host, making sure everything runs smoothly.
Makes sense. So what are the key ingredients for a successful Wise Crowds gathering?
First things first, you got to know why you're having this gathering in the first place. What's the main goal? What are you hoping to achieve?
So it's not just about getting people in a room and seeing what happens. You need a clear purpose, right?
Exactly. Think of it like your North Star. It guides the whole process.
Yeah.
And once you know what you're aiming for, then you can think about who to invite.
Right, the guest list. And we talked about this before, but it's not just about inviting the usual suspects.
The more diverse your group, the better. It's like, cooking. You want different flavors, different spices to make things interesting.
Makes sense. Okay, so you've got your purpose. You've got your diverse group of people. What's next? Do we need party hats?
Maybe not party hats, but definitely a space where people feel comfortable. Good seating, natural light, maybe some snacks and drinks.
Right, set the mood. No one's going to have brilliant ideas in a boring old conference room.
Exactly. And don't forget the practical stuff. Make sure there are whiteboards, flip charts, pens, and paper. The tools people need to capture their ideas.
So it's like setting up an artist's studio, giving everyone the supplies they need to create something awesome.
I like that.
Okay.
So we got the space sorted. Now, how do we actually guide people through the Wise Crowds process?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. Is there like a script we follow? A set of rules?
The structure is actually pretty simple. Remember, each person gets a turn as the client, and everyone else are the consultants.
Right, and we went through those basic steps before. The client shares their challenge, the consultants ask questions, then the client turns their back while the consultants brainstorm, and finally they get feedback.
Yep, that's it. But even though the structure is simple, the facilitator still has an important role, keeping things on track, making sure everyone feels heard.
Ah, so you're not just letting everyone run wild. There's an art to guiding the conversation without, like, stifling it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Think of the facilitator like the conductor of an orchestra. They're not playing the instruments, but they're making sure everything flows together, creating something beautiful.
Okay, I get it. But how do you actually do that? Like, what are some specific things a facilitator can do at each stage of the process?
So first, when the client is presenting their challenge, sometimes people get so caught up in the details that it's hard to see the big picture.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like, you're so focused on the problem that you can't even explain it clearly.
Right. So the facilitator can help the client articulate their challenge in a way that makes sense. Ask some prompting questions like, what's the core issue here? Or what are the stakes? What happens if this problem isn't solved?
Ah, those are good questions to help the client really frame the challenge. What about the clarifying questions stayed? How do you make sure those questions are actually helpful and not just, leading the client in a certain direction?
It's about encouraging questions that really dig deep, not questions that try to solve the problem too quickly.
Yeah.
And the facilitator, they can gently redirect things if the conversation starts going off on a tangent or if the questions get a little too judgmental.
Right, got to keep that balance. Open exploration, but respectful at the same time. Okay, then what happens when the client turns their back?
That's when the facilitator can remind everyone about the ground rules. Those guidelines we talked about before, like no judging, only curiosity, focus on the client, not your own opinions.
Right. It's about creating that safe space where everyone feels comfortable sharing honestly, even if the client can't see them.
Exactly. It's amazing how powerful that little act of turning around can be. It creates this sense of, like, permission to really speak your mind. Okay, so then the consultants have brainstormed, the client turns back around. Now it's feedback time. What does the facilitator do here?
Yeah, this seems like a tricky part.
Well, the facilitator can help make sure the feedback is clear, concise, and actually helpful. It's not about overwhelming the client with a million suggestions. It's about offering a few carefully considered perspectives.
Right. And they can also help the client, process all that feedback. Right.
Yeah.
Because it's probably a lot to take in all at once.
Totally. They can ask things like, what really stood out to you? Or what new ideas came up that you hadn't thought of before? It's about helping the client connect the dots and figure out what actions they want to take based on what they heard.
It's like translating all that collective wisdom into something the client can actually use.
Exactly. And then finally, the facilitator can wrap things up, summarize the key takeaways, and make sure everyone feels like, something was accomplished.
So it's not just about the Wise Crowd session itself, it's about what happens after. How do you take all those insights and turn them into action?
Right. It's about leaving people feeling energized and inspired, ready to tackle their challenges. So facilitating a Wise Crowd session, it's definitely a skill. You need to be a good listener, a clear communicator, and you need to be able to create that safe, supportive environment where everyone feels comfortable sharing.
It sounds like a lot to juggle, but I bet it's also really rewarding, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. When you see a group of people come together, tap into their collective wisdom, and help each other find solutions, it's pretty amazing to be part of that.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from the theory of Wise Crowds to real-world examples, and now even the practical steps of how to facilitate it.
I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to give it a try.
Me too. And remember, Wise Crowds is just one of many liberating structures out there. There's a whole world of these techniques just waiting to be explored. So if you're looking for new ways to shake things up, to unleash your team's creativity, I encourage you to check out Liberating Structures. You might be surprised at what you discover. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Wise Crowds.
See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.